Hey everyone, how's it going? For Chapter 2, I decided to discuss the dimensions of nonverbal communication and how they help interpret verbal communication. So the book describes nonverbal communication on page 24. It says, put simply, nonverbal communication, also referred to as body language, includes all those ways we communicate without words. A more technical definition for nonverbal communication is communication other than written or spoken language that creates meaning for someone. Ivy and Wall, 2014, paragraph 5. I think that nonverbal communication is important because it helps us understand each other on another level. So, for instance, if I'm at an interview and I'm looking at the ground or tapping my foot or twirling my hair, doing something that's, kind of in an unsettling situation, then you might interpret that I'm probably nervous. Instead, if I'm making eye contact, if I'm listening, maybe give a subtle nod or something every so often, that I understand what you're saying or what the interviewer is saying, and not checking the clock every 30 seconds, doing something like that, then I'm showing my interviewer that he has my undivided attention, even though I'm not verbally talking to him. The other question from Chapter 2 that I wanted to answer was explaining the four purposes of nonverbal communication by giving an example of each at work. So the first function is expressing emotion. One time I was working at Taco Bell, had a coworker who was having a bad day, and every time they talked to a customer in the drive-thru, they just sounded really angry. And kind of backstory is you're supposed to have a smile on your voice when you work at customer service. Is kind of what I was taught. So I pulled them aside, asked them what was wrong. They just kind of told me that nothing was wrong, everything was fine. But based off how they were acting, how their voice sounded, kind of storming around the store, things like that, I could tell that they weren't fine, just because of their tone and how they're moving about. And so basically, I just sent them on a break to cool down for a bit. They came back, they apologized, and then they were good to go. So I think sometimes, even if people don't want to say anything or just feel like they can't tell you something, if you look for the signs, situations like that, you can make a small difference. And in this case, it helped them out, and they cooled down and came back, and were good to go. The second purpose is to convey interpersonal attitudes. So another talkable story. I'm gonna have a lot of these. My GM's a busy guy. I saw him briefly actually this last Sunday, and we're talking about my work schedule. He was just leaving work as I was just getting there, and I just bombed him with a bunch of questions about my schedule, trying to see if I could change it, just a couple different things like that. And visibly, I could see that he was kind of checked out, and he just, kind of had the look of like, I'm ready to go home, I want to go home, like, let me out kind of thing. And basically, the response I got from him was he was looking at his phone. I think he was texting his wife or he was doing something, and he just kind of goes, and then he kind of, walked. And so I was like, oh, whatever, like, maybe he heard me, maybe he didn't, not too big of a deal. But he actually ended up texting me later, and he ended up partly remembering that I had mentioned something about changing my schedule, but he just couldn't remember any of the details. So I just kind of figured that, what I learned from that situation was I should talk to him either earlier in the day or another day or a time when he's got more energy or more focus. Just based off the situation that had happened, wasn't the ideal time to talk to him. And in return, he didn't understand or didn't, have enough attention span to pay attention to what I was asking and telling him. The next function is one's personality. So I find the fact that I go to work at ESD every morning. My boss is an awesome guy. He is always there and he greets me every day. I go in at about 6:37. He's usually always there by like 6. And every morning when he comes in, he always has a pot of coffee going. He always, kind of comes out of his office and greets us as we all come in, each of us that come to work. And I just find that it's those little things that kind of, build up and that's what I think a great boss comes down to, is just kind of the little things that they can do along with the big picture. And so that's just one of those things that his personality of him being always warm and greeting and friendly just makes it a fun place to work. And so it makes me happy to actually go to work. The fourth and final function is nonverbal communication that accompanies verbal communication. So being a manager at Taco Bell, I run into situations a lot with people actually lying to me. In this case, it is a coworker. So, quick backstory, when you get to work, the policy is that you should be ready to go to work before you clock in, or when you clock in. So, if you have brought a bag, or a bike, or a skateboard, or you don't have your shirt on, or your apron or something, like, you're supposed to go put those down, kind of get yourself ready, put a hairnet on, if you need to take a jacket off, so whatever it is, you need to be ready to work before you clock in. And so I had this one young lady who she would always come into work and she would clock in before doing any of that. And so one day I was kind of working and kind of noticed that she'd clocked in and then came back and in the back and started to actually start getting ready for work. And so I kind of confronted her about it. And I was like, hey, I'm not going to say her name, but I said, hey, did you already clock in? And she didn't turn around, didn't say anything. And so I kind of stood there for a second and I was like, hey, did you clock in already, or are you still off the clock? And she's like, oh, no, I didn't clock in. And so I was like, okay, well, I didn't say this, but in my head I was kind of like, well, I know you did, so let's kind of see how we're going to play this out. So basically I waited until she was done putting her things down, getting ready, and then she kind of looked at me and I said, all right, go clock in. And she just kind of stood there for a second. And I was like, you have something to tell me. And yes, she admitted that I already clocked in. And so I was feeling kind of nice that day. So I said, you know what? I said, I'm going to give you a final verbal warning. But I said, the next time this happens, it's going to be documentation. That's not okay. You shouldn't be lying to your manager. And it's the nonverbal things that, I guess the moral of the story I'm getting at is her non-verbally telling me, or not responding to me, kind of trying to hide it, trying to think that I'd let it go, and then coming back to finally talking to me, admitting it was just kind of something that I just kind of noticed it and saw it, and it is what it is. For Chapter 3, I'm going to actually be talking about listening and hearing, the similarities, differences, and confusions between them. So hearing, the book states on page 44, as your physical ability to detect sounds, and also on page 44, listening requires you to concentrate on verbal and nonverbal messages being sent to determine the meaning of those messages. So the similarities between them are that you use your ears for both of them. Kind of a saying that kind of, I guess, rings true for both of these, which I'm sure everyone's heard, is in one ear, out the other. Pretty common. I kind of interpret that as loosely that someone can tell you something, and if you're not really focused on actually listening to it, but you're hearing it, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other, so you didn't really get the point of the message, or you were distracted or not paying attention. And so that's just kind of something that comes to mind when I thought of that. And then one of the differences is the fact that you can, at least I believe, that you can hear what someone's saying, but not really focus on the message. So kind of like background noise. If you really wanted to eavesdrop, you could kind of tune your hearing to what someone else was saying, or vice versa. If someone was talking to you and you just kind of tune them out, and you're not really listening to what they're saying, but you can kind of consciously hear them talking. That's just kind of something that I found was a difference. And then I think that's kind of where the confusion comes into play a little bit, is I think that you can hear someone without actually listening to them. But you can also listen to someone, I think, through nonverbal cues as well. So you can watch other people's reactions as they're talking. So if you give someone sad news, you might notice their face kind of get, low and sluggish and kind of, sad. If you tell someone good news, you might see them crack a smile and get happy, say something funny like a joke, they might laugh, snort something. I mean, that's more verbal a little bit, but kind of along the same lines there. And then the other question on Chapter 2 was the 2 barriers for listening. And 2 that I've encountered are distractions and active listening. So for this, my best example is I have a niece, and she just turned 8. She's in 3rd grade this year, and she just loves to talk and talk. So it is fun to hang out, and she definitely has kind of, I guess I kind of call it squirrel brained, where you kind of, talking, and then squirrel, something else kind of takes your attention, and then something else comes back to it, and pretty soon you're off topic completely. So I was trying to teach her Catan, Settlers of Catan, whatever the game's called. And, I can tell that she, when she starts losing interest in a game or gets bored or is losing, I notice she'll kind of start to move on to another topic, or in this case, she ended up kind of slowly backing out of the kitchen. We were playing it at the table, and going into the living room, and I was like, what's going on? And she's like, oh, I'm done playing. And I was like, oh, okay. And then, or other times when she is sitting in her chair, she'll kind of fidget, and she'll start talking to me about oh, you know what, Candyland's a really fun game, and Sorry's a fun game, and I'm kind of like, okay, what are you trying to say? Like, are you bored or do you want to play something else? And she'll, kind of him and haw for a minute and then be like, oh yeah. Uh, and then there's another time where she also taught me, like, she was teaching me to play a card game that she learned at school. And then in the middle of like teaching me something, she'll tell me something random or a fact or something crazy that happened somewhere, which I totally love to death. But then she loses track of where we was at and doesn't remember whose turn it was, or if she was in the middle of explaining an instruction on how to play and then never finished that thought. If I, make a mistake while playing or did something wrong, she'll get kind of frustrated that I didn't, why don't you know that? And I'm like, well, you didn't really finish telling me, so. She's a hoot. I love her to death. But so far, I hope everyone's getting a quarter, and that's what I got for you guys today. Can't wait to read everyone or watch everyone's videos. Thanks.